So, this lesson is entitled, What is Personality Type? And what we're going to talk about first are the functions. And the functions are two. The first is how you get data, and the second is how you make decisions. They are a rich source of interpersonal conflict. The more we know, however, about these differences, the better able we are to deploy ourselves on tasks that are important to us, and the better we're able to avoid conflict. Does that sound like a plan? Let's start with something simple, the data. I mean, how hard can data gathering be, right? Well, stick with me and we'll find out what the differences are, what the strengths of each preference is, and what the potential pitfalls of those preferences might be. So if you have that preference, you can avoid it. Remember, the first function is it's all about the data.
Now let's imagine that you have this gorgeous, red, delicious apple in the palm of your hand. Now I want you to just take a piece of scratch paper, pencil, pen, and I want you to write down everything that comes to mind to describe this apple. There are no right or wrong answers, and go with whatever comes to mind first. Make a list. This little exercise, this experience will help us understand the difference between sensing, S, and intuition, which is about how you get data. And on the flip side, I'll show you how sensing and intuition differ in that particular function. So take a minute, write down everything that occurs to you to describe an apple. Okay, so this is an exercise we do in the graduate school at the University of Maryland. And I'm going to share with you some of the things the students have said when they do the same exercise. And they don't have just a picture, they actually have apples, but you'll get the idea. So everybody agrees it's a red apple and it's shiny. And some people say it's firm because they touched it and it wasn't squishy, and it's fresh. And some people will actually taste it. And some people will actually measure it at about 3.5 inches from top to bottom. It had an organic label on it. The stem, if you noticed, is very, very short. And there's a tiny bruise on the bottom. If your answers look like these, then you're likely sensing. And what sensing means is that you get data, both past and present information that can be verified through the 5 senses. On the other hand, if your list starts out red, shiny, organic, and then starts talking about your grandma's apple tree and how it had a rope swing in it, and then you think about Newton and gravity, or Newton and fig Newtons, that fruit cookie, or apple pie, or next Thanksgiving, because you know apples are one of the things that go into the pies that we traditionally eat at Thanksgiving, or you think about an iPod, or you think about Christmas, then you may be more likely an intuition, an N person in terms of how you get data. Just like the sensing people, you start with the facts, the discernible sensory data, but then you start thinking about what the possibilities are and how it's related to other experiences you had. Now, this is a very fundamental difference between how we get data as S's and how we get data as someone with intuition. The S's may seem way too literal minded to the people who are intuitives, the N's, because if they can't see it, feel it, touch it, taste it, smell it, it's not true. And the intuitives, when they start talking about iPods, when they've been asked to describe an apple, may seem really impractical and not very grounded to the S's. Let's move now to tease out a little bit more about this data gathering function and the differences between sensing and intuition, between S and N. So people who are sensing types, the S, it's the second letter in your Myers-Briggs type, tend to first perceive immediate tangible facts through the 5 senses. So think sensing, think 5 senses. They see specific parts, details with the five senses. They tend to be very present oriented, enjoying what's there, and they prefer practical, concrete problems. They really don't like theoretical, abstract problems, and they like things that are definite and measurable. Makes sense because those things all use your senses as the way to gather data. Think about them as the apple as an apple. Now, the N's, the people with intuition, tend to first perceive possibilities, patterns, and relationships, trends as well, through insights that they get starting with the data, but then they kind of go off on their own. So they see an apple, they think apple pie. They see patterns and relationships. They live toward the future. They're always thinking about what might be, and they prefer imaginative new solutions to problems rather than tried and true practical ones from the past. They can be very impatient with the details, and they like to be inventive. They like to take what's real and see what's possible.
Hi, I hope you're enjoying this free lesson from the University of Maryland's Project Management Center for Excellence. If you want to check out more lessons just like this one, click the link in the description below where you'll be able to go to our website on executive project management. There, you can find edX courses, professional short courses where you can learn from an instructor like me, as well as request custom team training for you and your organization. All right, let's get back to the lesson and I'll see you at the end.
Since how we get data is so fundamental, let's compare the process between sensing and intuition, S's and N's, for where they start, how they progress in getting data, what their approach is to it, and their preferences. So sensing types start at the beginning. It's very linear. N's, on the other hand, jump in anywhere, maybe in the middle, and they hop around all the time. So they may start at A, move to H, come back to C, go out to Z. They're building sort of a map of the ideas, the concepts. S's progress in their data gathering process one step at a time in order. They go A, B, C. N's not so much. They leap over steps, they may skip steps altogether, or they may simply take them out of order. The approach to getting data for S's is very hands-on. Think using your senses actively. In seminars I've run, S's may actually measure, taste, smell the apple. It's a bottoms-up approach. N's, on the other hand, look at the overall design, how the parts fit together, and a top-down approach. And then they look at what might I do with this? And the preferences also differ. So sensing types use and refine the known and familiar. And intuitive types, the N's, want to experiment with something new and different. So let's start our consideration about which of the data gathering functions might be best for project managers. Are you ready? Here we go. So I have a small project to do. I have to plan a trip to Los Angeles, and I have to go next week. I'm going by air. I need a hotel and a car, and I'm on a super, super tight budget, so I have to be very cost effective. Now, my personal data gathering preference is N for intuition. And oh, by the way, I'm under a little bit of stress. I don't have much time to get this done. Which data gathering approach should I use? Remember, N, intuitive, is my preference. Now, we tend to think of our own preference, whatever it is, in this case, data gathering, as the very best preference. It's only natural. It's the one we're most familiar with and the one that feels most comfortable. But in this case, is it? Let's see. Imagine, if you will, that I use my unbridled N function for data gathering to plan this trip. And remember, N's are abstract, conceptual, theoretical. Does that sound like a good way to get a cost-effective trip booked to LA? Maybe not. So this example gives us a really good way to tease out the difference, and this is true for every preference pair, between our natural preference, in this case mine's an N, and our specific behavior, which is governed by the task. So even though I'm an N, I'm going to approach finding the right airfare, hotel, and car, and making it cost effective using S-like behavior. So the data gathering approach would be S, even though I'm an N. And remember, we do that flex, and we have that flex ability in every preference. And the more mature we get as our personality develops, the better able we should be to flex.
It's time now. We've explored, it's all about the data, talking about the first function. And I'm going to recap briefly the big ideas. We've covered a lot about the first of the two functions, sensing and intuition. And remember, intuition starts with an I, but because introvert has already taken it, intuition is an N. Just one of those little things. Those two things describe how we get data. Something basic, describe an apple. So S's, sensing people, gather data through the 5 senses. Makes sense. And they tend to focus on past experiences, essentially things they've experienced before through the 5 senses. So very tangible, verifiable data. And the present, also tangible, verifiable data. N's, on the other hand, they do start with sensing because they're humans and that's how we interact with the world, but they quickly move on to seeing patterns and relationships among the data. And if you will, they build out their own system or mind map of all their knowledge. They're really about the relationships between and among all the data that's in their head. They tend to focus less on the present and the past and more on the future possibilities, the trends that are suggested by the data. So as we saw in It's All About the Data, an S will describe an apple, but they're not going to compare it to an iPod. But an N will, if they're operating to their preferences. Is one better than the other? Likely not. Remember, I said no personality type is good or bad, and no preference is good or bad. They each have certain gifts and certain potential pitfalls. So we have a trait, each of us, that has a preference, and sometimes a mixed preference, for being either an S or an N. With facets, those little details underneath it, that make it more nuanced as we dig into the details of our personality type. No matter what our preference, our behavior is our choice. So for example, I'm an N, but if I need to balance a checkbook or do my internet banking, I'm going to be very S-like in my behavior, even though I'm an N. We'll talk about that flexing thing a little bit later on. So it's really important that we understand these differences and how they can create conflict, but also the strengths and potential pitfalls they bring to our ability to do something as fundamental as gathering data.
Hey there, did you enjoy that lesson as much as I did? If you did, go ahead and give us a like. If you want to see another one, go ahead and subscribe. And if you have any questions or comments, put them below and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Moreover, is there somebody in your life who really needs this lesson right now? If so, go ahead and share it with them. I'm sure they'll appreciate it. Now, we look forward to seeing you in the next lesson where you can learn even more from the University of Maryland Project Management Center for Excellence. Thanks so much.